Hello, good morning. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to try to get this wrapped up in about an hour. There's a lot of information to cover, so I will try to go slowly. But here we go. My name is Natasha Morris, and I have been working at Collins-Warman for 11 years, and almost that entire time, I have been involved with our student recruiting efforts and have reviewed more than 300 candidates a year. So I have seen a lot of applications. Today, we're going to be talking about introductory emails, cover letters, and resumes, the first steps to applying for a job and the first session of our series. By no means will I declare that I have the magical equation to making the perfect application material. There's a lot of gray area when it comes to what you should and shouldn't do, and even I struggle with my own content. But what I do think is helpful is to point out the things that we see on a regular basis that could be improved on or better considered to help you create the best application you can. At the end of the day, you just need to be yourself and you need to cater to the firm that you are applying for. So we will go through some tips and tricks to help you get out of your own way and help your application be considered to land that first interview. Once I'm done with my presentation, I will respond to the questions that we received in advance that pertain to this presentation topic. And if we have additional time, I'll try to answer any new questions that you might send through live during the discussion. So let's start with introductory emails, which if you are applying blind to a firm that you have no personal connections with, this really is your first impression. So what you should do. First is to read the website for instructions. If they specifically tell you how to apply, where to send your application to, or where to upload it, just follow the instructions. If you don't hear from them, then you can go crazy and start sending it to any contact you can find. But I recommend starting off by following the instructions. Use a personal salutation if you can. See if the instructions on the website tell you the name of the hiring manager and use that. But if it's not specific, then I recommend just saying to whom it may concern. If you do know someone or met someone, say that in your email. We met at the career fair last week. You have to assume that these professionals are meeting hundreds of people, and while I'm sure you're very memorable, you just have to assume that we forgot and kindly remind us. Then state your purpose for applying. Now, I'm not looking for an objective statement necessarily, but why am I reading this email from you? Do you want a part-time internship? Are you recently graduated looking for a full-time job? What is it that you want? And then make sure that you reference your attachments or links that you've provided. What you shouldn't do, I recommend keeping the email concise. Don't just copy and paste your cover letter and put it into your email. Your email should be much shorter, and I will learn more about you in your application material when I review it. So let's say you haven't heard back from the 2 firms that you applied to, and now you're panicking, and you decide to just apply to every firm in town because you need a job. So you take the email that you sent and you just change the firm name and you send it to the masses. I know that people do this because I did it myself when I graduated, but here's the thing, we can tell. Usually we can tell from the language, but often we can tell because when the email goes from plain text to HTML or vice versa, the firm name that you changed shows a different font. And I can't tell you how many times we can physically see what you went through and revised in your email. So be mindful of creating a fresh email with every application. Use a professional email address. Your school one is a good choice. This used to be a much larger problem. We received a lot of inappropriate personal email addresses, so just be mindful of where you're sending it from. Similarly, keep an eye on the naming of your attachments. They shouldn't be inappropriate, but you also probably don't want it to say something like resume, final, real, final version 3. Happens all the time. And finally, consider what time of the day you're sending your application. I'm not sure how I feel about an application that was sent at 2 a.m. Are you nocturnal? Is this only a priority for you when you can't sleep? Will I be expecting you to communicate as an employee at 2 a.m.? Not a deal breaker, but personally, I do notice these things. So let's look at a few examples of intro emails. So here's an item. I didn't specify this, but let's consider your subject line. When I'm using my Outlook, I have it compile the conversations. So your Outlook will bundle your email with every other email that says application. So maybe consider your subject line to have your name in it. Then let's look at the salutation. It's not incorrect. but Collins Warman, it says, Dear Collins Warman. Collins Warman is not a person, so I would refer to whom it may concern. And I know I said to keep it concise, but this email tells me nothing. It just says, see attachments. So take a little bit more time to put more content into your email. So here are examples with more content. No need to read these. I know you probably can't. The one on the left says, I was referred to your firm from the UW newsletter. Hey, that's great. Explains how you found us and why you're applying. Then it says that they would like to request consideration for an internship. They're currently a student. Perfect. But looking at the file names, it says Final 6, and it says Portfolio Collins Warman. This is not our portfolio, it's yours. Maybe it should have your name. Their email address is jojobeans@hotmail. Not bad, not great. And then getting into the meat of the email, it's a bit wishy-washy and non-professional. They say what especially jumped out was that they live next to one of our projects and they can see it from their bedroom. Cool, but is this critical, and does it explain why they're a good fit or why I want to look at their application material? Probably not, so let's not try to stretch our content. The next one on the right has a good salutation. It says, Dear Hiring Manager. It has a good statement of application. It says, I am a spring 2014 graduate and would like to apply for an interior design internship. I like that they included their contact information in their signature, not in the body of the email, but their file name could still be better. The subject line is still a little bit vague. Now, all of this advice seems really simple. On any given day, it won't make or break your opportunity for an interview. But when I get 20 of these in a day and I skim them, it's good to find a way to be concise and to the point, and also professional and enticing enough that I want to look at your application materials. This is your first impression, so make sure that it's a good one. The next step is the cover letter. So what is a cover letter? It's a one-page document that introduces you and briefly summarizes your professional background. You may be asking, do I really need one? Cover letters are too formal and professional and something that my parents used to do. They aren't important now, and I already introduced myself in my email. That's all true, but that's also not the case. You need one. Even though you sent this with content in your email, your attachments need to be able to stand alone. Someone may print this along with your resume and give it to someone else to evaluate, and that person hasn't seen your initial email, or if they do have to print your email for context, the formatting of it just isn't flattering. So yes, you need one, and yes, redundancy here is acceptable. Something you will hear me talk about with the cover letter and the resume is branding. We are designers, so not only do we have the freedom to be creative with our application materials, but it's expected. So this is not only your opportunity to showcase your education and your experience, but you're also showing us your ability to present content in a meaningful way. You should be using Adobe Suites to make your content, not Word or PowerPoint. You should be mindful of your font, your layout, and your use of white space, and you should be building a brand for yourself. I should be able to glance at your application and know immediately that you are a designer, you are talented, and I should get a sense of who you are before I even read a single word. So your cover letter is the first step. In general, it should present your brand. It should include your contact information. Start with an intentional and appropriate greeting. Then you need to grab the reader's attention, take a moment to explain why you are the perfect candidate, then why you are a good match for the company, and then close. So do's and don'ts. As I mentioned, do include a cover letter. Use a personal salutation. This can match what you put in the email. Reference again if you know someone, though this one probably should be more focused on if you were referred to this firm or if you have a personal contact. If you don't know the firm and you just found out about them through your school's newsletter, I don't know that I would put that here. Keep it concise, just one page, honestly probably more like half a page. Again, state your purpose for applying. You should be providing only useful information, who you are, what you want, and why I as the reader care. I know that may sound blunt, but it's true. Tell me why it's beneficial for me to spend time looking at your resume and portfolio. Keep specific details to your resume, such as where you interned or years of schooling. Then, be mindful of your voice. You want to walk a very fine line between being confident but humble. And I would try to match the voice of the company. Now, be careful with this one, because I don't mean to go to their website and copy their mission statement and regurgitate it here in your cover letter. It shouldn't be forced. It should feel like it's coming from you. But if the firm is passionate about something in particular, or if they use a certain word repeatedly on their website, then mirror that a little bit. It's similar to mirroring someone's body language when they're speaking. They subconsciously see the connection and they feel more comfortable. So use the website as a tool. Always use spell check. Always. I know that architects and designers are often not the best spellers, but that's really not an excuse here. Errors stick out to me like a sore thumb. So if I find more than one, it usually shows me that your attention to detail is lacking. And this is why I would actually recommend maybe having a friend review and provide feedback, maybe even someone with expertise in the written language, not a designer. So don't mass produce your cover letters. Again, like the emails, it is very tempting to write one magnificent cover letter and go through the change the name of the company before sending it out. But these are so obvious when people do this, particularly if you forget to change the name of the company, which happens so much more often than you would expect. This also goes with matching the voice of the company. If you tell me that you are passionate about civic projects and hospitality and historical preservation, and my company doesn't do any of that, I know that not only did you not do your homework, but you don't really know who we are, and you also didn't take the time to write a personal cover letter. And in the grand scheme of things, it's worth every few extra minutes you make to make it seem like you really do want to work for the firm that you're applying for. Don't focus on what you'll gain from this job. Most of the cover letters I read tell me how great this potential job will be for the candidate, that they will get real world experience, that they will get to work on a project type that they're interested in and learn new things. But again, remember, you are trying to entice the reader to look at your application and be interested in interviewing you. The hiring manager is solely interested in what they gain from hiring you, not necessarily what you gain from getting this job. We know that this opportunity will be great for you, but what's in it for us? Why should we choose you over the next candidate? Similarly, don't draw attention to your weaknesses. Students will say, I know I don't have a lot of relatable experience, but I'm super passionate. You don't need to highlight that for us in your cover letter. We will see it ourselves on your resume. So it's best to assume that it's not an issue, don't highlight it, and move on. Or if you have gaps in your employment, red flags that you think we will notice, I wouldn't highlight them unless you have a really good story that sets you apart from everyone else. But also be careful not to provide too much personal information. Your whole life story is not necessary. Don't refer to yourself in the third person. I'm not sure why that's a thing, but I've seen it. And again, don't forget spell check. So let's look at this example. Again, probably can't read it, but that's okay. The first thing I notice is it's missing any sort of a header, formal introduction, or branding. It just looks like a generic Word document. Next, it has a lot of information, but they're literally repeating the resume. It says that they interned at a firm in Chicago called Freeman Design Group. And prior to that, they were a drafter, and that they know Revit and AutoCAD and took an active role in a book club. Something here might spark my interest when I'm reading it, but don't just replicate your resume. And this is what I mean by evident font change through mass production. The introduction that says Dear Collins Horman, the font doesn't match the rest of the letter, and that's actually very common that we see that. Here are more examples. Don't expect you to read these, but visually see how they work. They are clean, they have personality. I expect to see this branding resonated on the resume and portfolio. This one on the right is a little bit long, but maybe it's all pertinent information. I can promise you, I would not read this whole cover letter. I probably read the first paragraph and then the first sentence in the second paragraph and then jump to the end. So make sure that they're eye-catching, but also make sure that they're not too long. So moving on to resumes. So this is the order in which they're usually read. First the email, then the cover letter, then the resume, and they should all build on top of each other without being too redundant. With a resume, you really want to keep it concise. The average time that someone spends looking at a resume for the first time is 6 seconds. It really should be one page. For some of you, that might be difficult. You may want to share every little detail that helps set you apart from other applicants, and you may have a lot of accolades and experience under your belt. And for others of you, it may be a struggle to actually fill in an entire page with content that you think is relevant and meaningful. But a page, 1 full single page is your goal. And that means that bullet points are good, novels are not necessary. Make it easy to scan and find important information in under 6 seconds. And you must assume that we're just skimming your resume very quickly. Each reviewer tends to have a few things that they hone in on, but it's very unlikely that your resume is read in full detail the first time around. Honestly, I actually read the resume first. I skim it for a few specific things. Then, if I'm intrigued, I read the cover letter. Then I come back and I review the resume further. So you want to write about your work experience in active language. You want to say, I earned, I achieved, I accomplished. Obviously, you are showcasing your skills, both in the format and presentation of your resume, but you also want to literally list your skills. And if you have a lot, you may want to organize them by software or hand skills or people skills, and then absolutely use the branding from your cover letter in your portfolio. You want to consider the order of your content as well. It should start with most important on top. What is most important is kind of up to you. General rule of thumb is that if you are in school or recently graduated, then your education should be listed first, then your work experience, then everything else. And this is often because your education is your best achievement. So you may not have much in regards to work experience. That's why you put that second. Then, of course, content goes chronologically. What I find odd sometimes, though, is when students study abroad, because they put things chronological, the top of their list has, for example, a school in Denmark, and then they list their graduate school below that. And I always initially assume that they are an international application before I realized that it was a study abroad program, which in itself is not typically your best achievement. So I would recommend finding a different way to showcase your study abroad program, either listing it as a subcategory or breaking the chronological structure, which is perfectly acceptable if the intent is easy to follow. It is great to include hobbies, not a laundry list of them, but something that shows your personality and shows that you have interests outside of school. Many people these days use icons to represent their interests, and I think that's a good, concise approach as long as they aren't distracting or difficult to decipher. Same with affiliations and service. They're great to include and to show that you're well-rounded and making an effort to further advance yourself and the industry or your community. And hobbies and affiliations are also great fillers for an otherwise sparse resume. And use spell check. Some things to avoid. So don't send your resume in a Word document. Honestly, I shouldn't even be able to open it and revise it. I don't want to revise your resume. I want it in a clean PDF format that matches the rest of your application. And we would advise against including a self-portrait. So yes, there are probably some very logical arguments for why you've been told to include one, but we don't recommend it. You are not being hired for your looks, or you shouldn't be at least, and we want to avoid any unconscious bias or discrimination. And plus, remember, the 6 seconds that I'm going to spend looking at your resume, you don't want me to waste that time spending it looking at your portrait. But people are kind of adamant about this, so if you really want to include one, please make sure that it is professional, a professional headshot, and not something too distracting, unless that's really the personality that you're trying to showcase, and then by all means. I don't see a benefit in showing your class grades, particularly for specific classes. Now, if you graduated from the most difficult program in the nation with a 4.0 in honors, and that's the accomplishment that you want to highlight, then absolutely go for it. Otherwise, I hate to inform you, and don't let this crush you, but your grades are usually not a top criteria when it comes to professional practice. Next, I have a whole slide dedicated to this topic, but skill set scales. People used to just list their skills, which is great, and then they started to make sliding scales to show how proficient they were at a particular skill. And now resumes are just filled with software icons and scales that are honestly hard to interpret. I will show you examples later, but this is on our don't list. And then social media handles. They're really not beneficial, and all of them should be avoided except for maybe LinkedIn. But honestly, you don't need to include a hyperlink for your LinkedIn account. If someone uses that website, they can easily search you if they are so inclined. And if I haven't said it enough yet, don't forget spell check. So let's review some examples. Again, I don't expect you to read these. We're looking more at the design, the structure, the format. You can get a sense for personality behind each of these, and you can tell that they've spent some time making sure that the content reads well. And this is how I review resumes. We have the one on the left from Brad Pitt. The bold categories are really easy to navigate, so I'm able to quickly find what it is that I'm looking for. He has his experience listed first. That's okay, because his professional experience is relevant and it's recent. So he has experience, that's great. Then I jump to education, honestly, just to see when he graduated. It says 2020, so recent graduate or possibly an intern. He also notes a minor that he has, and then I glance at the skills. I see Rhino, Revit, AutoCAD, great, I'm done. That's literally all I do. Then I usually reread the cover letter if I didn't read it the first time. Then I skim the portfolio to look at their work samples, and if I'm still interested in this candidate, then I come back and I read more between the lines. Harrison in the middle is super compact, maybe too simple, but honestly, it covers all of the information that I'm looking for. It even does a good job outlining the years of experience that he has listed with each of his skills. And maybe the level of detail is expressive of his personality and his work style. And then Dwayne is clean, easy to navigate, not too robust. Personally, I wouldn't include references like he has. You can provide them after your interview goes well, and I tend to feel like they take up too much valuable space. But honestly, in this example, they're clean and they're out of the way, and they're not drawing my attention and they're not wasting space, so they're fine. Skills are similarly offset, which is nice, and broken into two categories of proficient knowledge and basic knowledge, which is easy for me to comprehend. Michael Jordan's is on the left. It's a good use of color, though yellow is dangerous because when I print it at the office in black and white, it may not read well. I like the subtle use of color in the next two examples, and I suspect that the branding of these will read well through their cover letter and their portfolio. And these three resumes, they all have objective statements, which personally I think is a bit old school, and I don't see them very often these days, but these ones are good. They're stating that they are a recent graduate or looking to obtain an internship. They're helping these resumes to be standalone documents, not needing the cover letter to go with them. Just make sure that it's tailored to the firm that you're sending them to. All right. These examples do have the content that we've discussed, but they could be executed better, and they're honestly a bit harder to navigate. Matt Damon's on the left, I would probably avoid tilting your text. I also think that this is a Word template, so let's not use Comic Sans. The one in the middle is actually 2 pages long, which isn't surprising given the paragraph that's at the top and the lengthy job descriptions that they included and their references. But more importantly, I was actually unable to locate this candidate's name on either resume page. I tried. I spent more than my 6 seconds just trying to find their name, and I only was able to figure it out by reading the email address. And then we have Sarah's on the right. This branding is honestly just poorly executed. Other than the name, I struggle to read or navigate the rest of the content, and I don't think that they list their education. It's hard to confirm. But I had to use deductive reasoning from their student activities listed to figure out what school they went to. Again, not a good use of my 6 seconds. And then skill set scales. So here are a few examples of what we have seen, and while they are good intentions with including them, we've yet to really find a good one that we thought was helpful. Over the years, they started out as just dot scales or bar scales like you see here, and then they've slowly turned into including actual software icons, which honestly just take up a lot of space and make resumes look clunky. But here's the problem. You are rating yourself typically on a 0 to 5, and most people stop at 4.5 because they've been told to never show that they're absolutely perfect at something, so they knock it off half a point just to be modest. And while they show that you're better at, say, Revit than SketchUp, we have no way of knowing what a 5 out of 5 is. Does this mean that you used it for a single studio and you feel comfortable? Does this mean that you used it at an internship for 2 years and you're a pro? Or more realistically, with 5 out of 5 should mean that you actually wrote the original code for Revit and have been teaching it at universities for the last 10 years. So what does it mean? one of these people in the example gave themselves a 10 out of 10 for English and Spanish, which I suspect means that they've been speaking both languages since they were 2. And therefore, since they have a 10 out of 10 for Illustrator, they have also been using Illustrator since they were 2. I do like the one on the bottom left, though. It's a bit difficult to read, but it's unique. And it ranks the skills and the passions from rookie to flawless, so I can generally interpret it. And this is why the resumes I showed that listed the years of experience with a skill, or at least just listed them as proficient or basic knowledge, they're easy to interpret. I don't need to figure out what 5 out of 5 is. So at the end of the day, I really just want to know if Revit is anywhere on your list, and then I'll use the interview probably to actually gauge your proficiency. And there you have it. There are our do's and don'ts for introductory emails, cover letters, and resumes. I hope that was helpful for you. I know that there's a lot of information in a short amount of time. And as I mentioned, we're now going to use the rest of our time to go through some Q&A. So let's start with the questions that we actually got in advance during the registration. So the first one is, should you include references with your application? So I kind of covered this one a little bit. Personally, I say no, and that's just because I don't check references before I've actually interviewed someone. That's more of a last step for us. So for me, your references are usually taking up a lot of space in your content, so I would keep them out. But if you're looking to fill some space, then go for it. They never hurt. Can you just provide a link to your website or issue? So issue links and websites are fine to provide. However, our firm prefers to review cover letters and resumes and portfolios in PDF format. It's generally in case we need to print it. They're easier to view or to make notes on or to save for our files. And also, no accessibility issues come up if we have them in PDF and it provides a standard format for all of your applications. And if you do include a website, I would just recommend that you make sure that it's short enough that someone's willing to type it into the browser in case the hyperlink isn't available for them to access it or if it's printed out. What kind of qualifications are mandatory? And this is a hard one because this is different for every firm. However, at Collins-Warman, we don't really have a mandatory checklist of items that you must have in order to be qualified for a job. We personally are looking for someone that stands out from the crowd, and it's up to you to come up with how to jump off the page. And of course, it always helps if you have some relevant experience or knowledge of softwares like Revit or SketchUp and work samples. However, these are not necessary requirements for consideration when you're applying for Collins-Warman. How has COVID impacted the job hiring process? So that's a really good question. I think we'll probably see the impact a little bit more long term. It probably has affected all of the industries the same. We've seen some projects slow down. Some firms have been hesitant to hire new candidates. For us, our application and interview process hasn't changed. We're still accepting applications like always. The interviews are now virtual, which is a little bit different for us, but we've done long distance interviews virtual in the past, so it's not too different. And we'll cover more of that in our upcoming presentation on interviews. And then integrating new employees into the office. They don't actually have ever stepped foot in the office, so that's been unique and challenging for us, and we're still working through that. And then the last question, is there a difference in formatting for students looking for internships or recent graduates? So in general, I think I kind of covered this, but the main answer is no. All content should be the same. It should all be included, and as a student or intern, you want to be performing like you're getting a full-time job. So don't hold yourself back, don't discredit your capabilities. The only difference we might see is if the quality of the portfolio might be a little bit different if you have less work, and the order of the content on the resume. An intern should always list their education first. So. And let's see, we have, okay, there is one question that came through live. So how do we brand ourselves in a cover letter? Do I have an example? The examples, so the ones that I showed, the way that I see the branding is really the use of color. The examples that I showed had, like, if the font was yellow at the top with the name, then that yellow is probably similar on the resumes and similar in the portfolio. So you want the coloring to be the same. You want the font to be the same. You want, usually in branding, you'll see like the level of detail that you provide. So if you are very simple and concise, it's going to be very clean and minimalistic across your cover letter and your resume and your portfolio. Whereas if you're more detail oriented and you've got a lot of content in there, your cover letter is probably going to be very long, your resume is going to be very packed, and your portfolio is going to be very large. So that's how we typically see branding across the cover letter. We received a few other questions that weren't relevant to this presentation, so we are going to be covering these in the future sessions. Hopefully you're able to join us for those. And that is all we have for today. Unless there's any other questions, I'll give you guys maybe a second to throw in another question. Otherwise, thank you for joining us. Our next presentation is on November 19th, where we'll be going over portfolio tips and tricks. So, oh, did receive one last question here. Do you suggest including the website portfolio on the resume? Yeah, whew, that's such a hard question because I hate websites are tricky. So first I want to remind you that I want you to include your portfolio as a PDF. But if you have much more information on your website, then yes, putting the link to your website on your resume is a good spot to put it. You can also put it in your email signature so that it's in 2 spots. And then, like I said, if you put a link on your resume, I would recommend that you try to get the link to be very short. So if someone has printed your resume and then they realize that they have to go in and type your website out by hand, you want it to be as easy as possible, because if it's difficult, they will just give up and they will not look at it. So. All right, that's it. Thank you so much for joining us, and hope you can join us for the next one. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.